All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for being here on this very foggy day, which is very fitting for our particular talk today. My name is Cinnamon Moffett. I'm the Research Program Manager here at Oregon State University's Hatfield Marine Science Center, and we are in Newport, Oregon. Primarily for those folks that are online, because this is a hybrid event. So we have folks in the room and folks online, and I wanted to welcome you both. For folks online, Mariana is here, and she's going to help with any questions you might have, either technical questions or questions for today's presenter. Just put those into the chat. She'll read them out as we open up our question and answer session, and we'll be able to get those answered for you. For folks in the room, because it's a hybrid event, we do need you to have a mic to ask a question. All you need to do when we open up that question and answer section for today, raise your hand and I'll bring you a mic and you can ask your questions that way. I wanted to let you know also that we are recording today's event. It'll be posted hopefully by tomorrow afternoon. So if somebody wasn't able to join us today and is interested, the link will be available on our website under the past seminar page. A couple quick announcements and then we're going to get started. I wanted to remind everybody that today is our last seminar of the summer, which is very exciting. We'll take a little break and we'll get started again in the fall. September 26th will be our next seminar series, but there'll be a couple of events that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to hand the mic off for a second to Mariana.
All right, so next Wednesday, the 14th at 8 a.m., we have the invertebrate class research project presentations here in this auditorium. So if you're interested in hearing about Anemone Fight Club, come on over. Next Thursday, August 15th at 2 p.m., the Hollings Prep intern research presentations will be happening in a conference room upstairs. If you're interested, you can talk to me about that after. And then on Friday, the 16th at 1 p.m. in the Barry Fisher room in the Gwynn Library, the Simmers intern presentations will be happening. And lastly, Thursday, the 22nd from 10 to 1 p.m., we will have our summer intern research symposium here in the Marine Studies building in the auditorium and out in the lobby.
As you can tell, we're wrapping up our summer series, and so we've got lots of student activities going on. So they're going to take priority over seminar for the next couple of weeks, but we're excited to have our students share with us. So hopefully you can join us at some of those presentations. But for today, I was connected by today's speaker by Alex. And so I'm actually going to have Alex take this mic and introduce Sonya.
Good afternoon. I'm Alex Dye, coming across the Coast Range from the College of Forestry at OSU Corvallis campus. And yes, Cinnamon conscripted me into doing the intro because I've worked with Sonya for a number of years now on this fog project that she's going to talk about today. We met about 3 years ago to just ask some of these questions about how do you get an idea of when and where fog is occurring. And she brings a very particular skill set at the mix of data science and atmospheric science to address that particular question. So Sonya Rauschenbach is a PhD student at UC Davis in California, working on her PhD with professors Chiata Pa'u in the microbiometeorology lab and Adele Egal in the cloud physics group. Dissertation research focusing on Pacific Coast fog and the terrestrial carbon cycle. Prior to coming to UC Davis to start her studies, she worked in analytics at the e-commerce platform Etsy, as well as the consulting firm Data Science Partners. So she has a very diverse background from lots of angles. Received her BA in political economy at New York University. In her free time, she enjoys hiking and traveling to coastal cities with her partner and her cat. And Sonya has been up in Newport all week long, visiting different sites along the coast, and some of these cameras that she's going to show today to get hands-on look at what she's been studying. So very happy to introduce Sonya, and all yours.
Oh, this one, I can turn yours on. Okay, it's on. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to talk about the work we've done to detect coastal fog in camera image data, as well as some preliminary results from the data set that we've collected so far. I'm working on this project with Alex Dye, John Kim, Chris Still, as well as my advisors, Adele Igo and Chata Pau. And so I wanted to know how many people here study marine science in this room? A couple of hands. How many people surf or like going to the beach or other beach activities? Nice. Okay. A lot of people in Newport, as you would expect. Okay. So now I'm going to give an overview of the presentation. So I'm going to start by talking about the project motivation and then get into a description of the different camera locations, talk a little bit about the classification model and our labeling. Then I'm going to compare the camera fog classification to the local airport data, just right down the road, Newport Airport. And then finally, I'll show a little of the fog spatial patterns that we've been seeing at the prototype sites. So up front, I wanted to thank our partners for sharing their image data with us and also for their support. So we've got images from surfline.com and Dr. Rob Holman at OSU. And this project is being funded by USDA Forest Service, Western Wildland Environmental Threat Assessment Center, and also by Earth Science Information Partners. So coastal fog is very important to the local climate. It diffuses radiation from the sun, which provides shading. It regulates temperature and provides moisture to ecosystems and has been shown to provide some nutrients to plant ecosystems. And fog is also important to understand because it makes transportation dangerous because it obstructs visibility. Fog is typically formed on the marine layer with warm, dry air advecting over cold ocean upwellings. And a lot of researchers are wondering how fog patterns along the Pacific coast and other coastal areas might change due to climate change. But in order to understand how coastal fog patterns might be changing, you first need to characterize what they are, which is very tricky because fog is very variable in time and space along the coast. So we wanted to know what is the spatial variation of fog along the Oregon coast to determine if these patterns have been impacted by anthropogenic changes. And the data sets that are typically used to look at fog spatial patterns have major limitations. For example, the satellite data MODIS, it only flies over twice a day and so misses a lot of the diurnal patterns that are very important for fog. And it doesn't necessarily fly over during the hours where fog is most prevalent. And then goes west, which provides pretty high resolution, both in time and space, can't distinguish between fog and low cloud cover, which have very different implications for the local weather, temperature, and moisture provided by fog. So why use cameras to detect fog? So compared to a visibility sensor, which is kind of the gold standard of fog measurement, cameras are much more affordable. Cameras are like hundreds of dollars, whereas visibility sensors are thousands of dollars. And then also, more importantly, cameras are an existing infrastructure. Like, for example, surfline.com, they show camera images, for their own priorities. And then the Department of Transportation has cameras all over highways, like on the 101, which is right by the coast, that they use to monitor traffic. And Alert West camera network for wildfire detection is a good example of a project that is using existing camera infrastructure for another important purpose, to detect wildfire smoke for early prevention and containment. And so this project will use Surfline cameras. So now I'm going to give a description of the camera locations. So there are 6 locations that we have along the Oregon coast. So I'm showing 3 at a time and going from north to south. So our northernmost location is Cannon Beach, and which is 60 miles north of our next location, which is Pacific City and Lincoln City. And so we've been saving images since the summer of 2022 and then every summer since. So we will have 3 summers of images, and we are using the images during the daytime where we can see fog from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And the images were saved every 30 minutes. And so then our 3 southernmost sites are all pretty close together: Otter Rock, Beverly, and Agate Beach. Although for Beverly, the camera was discontinued after 2022. So we just have a short time period there. And then we also have 3 cameras within 10 miles of the Newport Airport. So for different time periods, so we have Yaquina Head from 1992 to 2019, which is the camera that was provided by Dr. Rob Holman. And then we also have Agate Beach, which is kind of co-located with the camera on Yaquina Head, along with where we are today. There's a camera at Hatfield Marine Science Center, and we've been collecting data for the past month and plan to continue through the end of September. So here's a map of all of our locations. As you can see, Cannon Beach is much further to the north than the other cities. And also notable on this map is that Lincoln City, the landmass there is sort of pointed a little more northward. And around Cannon Beach in the topography map to the right of the slide, you can see that there's a mountain range which could impact local fog formation. Then Pacific City has some mountain ranges as well. And then zooming in to the sites that are close to Newport Airport, we have the Yaquina Head and Agate Beach. So the Yaquina Head camera is right on the tip of that peninsula, and the camera is facing southward, and it's looking over the same, the beach that the Agate Beach camera is at, but that camera is facing westward, so it's just looking at the ocean there. And then the camera at Hatfield is looking over the bay to the bridge. And then Newport Airport, the camera is located where that yellow star is. And this is a picture of the visibility sensor. So the visibility sensor is looking north and south along, it's legally required to look along the main runway of the airport. So that's what that visibility sensor is seeing. And so a visibility sensor is going to be a continuous measurement, but fog is defined as being less than 1 kilometer of visibility. So we're using that definition, even if that doesn't necessarily align with how we're labeling the photos, which is what I will show you next. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the labeling process and also the classification model performance. So we manually labeled over 10,000 photos. This is out of 60,000 total photos. And we used Microsoft Azure, which allowed us to view 9 images at a time and click on them and say if they were foggy, not foggy, or uncertain. And so for some photos, it was pretty easy to tell whether or not it was foggy. Like these photos, while one might be cloudy, they're all pretty clear. And similarly, other images, it was pretty easy to tell that it was foggy because fog was obscuring pretty much all of the ocean or all of the beach. However, there were a lot of photos where it was pretty challenging to tell because we didn't want to label them as just, is there any fog in the photo? Because that's really not how fog is defined. It's visibility less than 1 kilometer. We sort of decided if there was enough fog to kind of obstruct the horizon, then we would label it foggy. So for example, out of these images, 2 of them we labeled not foggy, and then the bottom one we labeled foggy because the horizon is obscured. But it's also important to note there is some degree of noise in how we've labeled the data. So to classify the images as foggy or not foggy, we use a Gaussian process classification model on different image statistics that we calculated over all of the pixels. And so this is kind of an example of how a Gaussian process classification model works with 2 input features. The model will determine the likelihood that each image contains fog or not, which makes it a very useful model because if each image will have, like, we can restrict our analysis to only images that we're 95% sure contains fog or 95% sure doesn't contain fog, which is over 76% of the images. So here, for the surfline photos and also the Hatfield camera, we had one model where we used for all of the sites. And so overall, the model was able to correctly identify there was fog like 86% of the time. And there was some variation within each individual sites. For example, Otter Rock had a very good classification score, whereas Lincoln City was 78%, so a little bit lower. But the bulk of them are around like 88%. And so we also compared the fog frequency for each of the site for our 10,000 labeled photos versus for the entire data set. And so this is showing that the model underpredicts fog slightly for all the sites when it doesn't get the percent of fog exactly right. For example, at Lincoln City, instead of 19% of the photos containing fog, which is what we had labeled, there was 17.7% of the photos contain fog. But locations like Agate Beach had like exactly the same percent of photos as what we had labeled. So now I'm going to compare the fog classification data set to the Newport Airport. So as you might expect, we saw a lot more fog from the camera database, in part because it's right facing the coast, and so it sees the marine layer, whereas the airport is like half a mile inland. And so we saw around like 5 to 10 times more fog directly off the coast as just half a mile inland. However, we are seeing really similar diurnal patterns, both at Yaquina Head from 1992 to 2019, and also at Agate Beach for the past 3 summers. This shows the likelihood of fog for each given hour, either classified from the camera data set or from the airport definition, which is less than 1 kilometer of visibility. And this also shows kind of what we're missing by only having images during daylight hours, because you can see that there is a lot of fog at night. But the peak fog times are during daylight hours. And so we're able to capture that with the camera data set. We also wanted to look at the seasonal frequency of fog. So this is the frequency at Yaquina Head versus the airport. And overall, the seasonal amplitude is really similar in the classified data set versus the airport data set. And we compared the blue is any fog for a given day in a 24-hour period, and the green is between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. And so they showed really similar patterns. This slide shows Agate Beach, where we only have 3 seasons of data, and the patterns matched up reasonably well, although there's some difference in amplitude, and the classified data set matched better fog in the 24-hour period versus just in daytime hours. We also looked at the long-term trends of fog with the data set at Yaquina Head from 1992 to 2019, and we compared the frequency of fog or the percent of hours that had fog at the airport and on the coast, and both showed a decline in the percent of hours where there is fog, and they also showed similar peak years and valley years. However, if we look at the percent of days where there's fog, during daylight hours, there's really no kind of discernible trend, but if you look during the 24-hour period, actually the number of days where there is fog has been slightly increasing over this time period. Also, we found something interesting when we looked at the wind patterns at the airport versus our fog data sets. So the wind is predominantly northward, and the first panel shows the wind patterns when there's no fog observations, either at the beach or at the airport. The second panel shows when there's fog at the beach or at the airport. And then the third shows when there's fog at the airport. So when there's fog at the airport, there's very low winds and it tends to be coming from the north. However, when there's fog at the beach, there's like a 10 times higher likelihood that their wind is coming from the south or southwest from when there's either no fog or fog at the airport. So this could be an interesting weather pattern to look further into to kind of understand why fog might be forming at the beach, but not further inland. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the fog spatial patterns at the prototype camera sites. So these are the results for the month of July 2024 from the 1st to the 20th of the month. And we haven't seen a lot of fog for this past month compared to what we were detecting for prior years. At Agate Beach, we've only seen fog around 5% of the time, at the airport around 3% of the time, and directly at the center around 1% of the time. So I'm curious if any of you have noticed that as well. And so this chart shows for a given day, was there fog at each of these sites? And you can see that there is some considerable variability in the middle of the month, though when there is fog at all 3 of the sites, it tends to happen on the same day. However, if you zoom into the half-hour data set, like this is taking July 19th as an example, actually during none of those half-hour periods did you see fog at 2 locations at the same time, which kind of shows the variability of how fog is moving along the coast on a foggy day. But you see fog at the airport in the morning and the evening, and then also at Hatfield, but at slightly different times than when you see it at the airport. And then at Agate Beach, the camera was detecting fog only in the evening of that same day. And so Now turning to our 5 surfline locations where we have 3 summers of data. This chart shows the percent of time that fog occurred at the same location at the same time. And it's pretty rare that for all 5 locations, you're seeing fog at exactly the same 30-minute period. That only happens 3% of the time, whereas it's actually most likely that you'll see fog only at one location at a given time. Although it is a lot more likely that you'll see fog on the same day at different locations. And so this chart shows the co-occurrence of fog at a given site. So the top row is it moves from north to south, Cannon Beach to Agate Beach. The top row shows that if there is fog at Cannon Beach, there's a 41% chance that there's also fog at Pacific City. And if there's fog at Pacific City, there's a 38% chance that there's also fog at Cannon Beach. And so there's some interesting patterns that we see here. So at Lincoln City, which had the most fog out of all of the sites, if there's fog at any of these locations, there's a pretty good chance that there's also fog at Lincoln City. And like at Pacific City, there's a 78% chance. Although at Agate Beach, which had kind of less than average fog, it is more likely than Cannon Beach, Pacific City, and Otter Rock to have fog when there is fog at another site. And then particularly, as you might expect, Otter Rock and Agate Beach are really close to each other. And you do see that when there's fog at Otter Rock, there's almost a 70% chance that there's fog at Agate Beach. And when there's fog at Agate Beach, there's like a 50% chance that there's fog at Otter Rock. And there's not a clear pattern moving north to south. Like if there's fog at Cannon Beach, there's a 40% chance that there's fog at Pacific City. However, it's more likely that when there's fog at Cannon Beach, you have fog at Agate Beach than Pacific City, which is the closest location to it. Although you do notice that when there's fog at Pacific City, Lincoln City, Otter Rock, or Agate Beach, it's least likely that there's fog at Cannon Beach. So to make this a little more tangible, I randomly selected images where at the same exact time, so this is at 3% of the time that there's fog at every single location. And you can see that all of the locations are pretty heavily foggy on this day. So this is an example of where there's like a huge system all along the coast and all of the locations are seeing fog. Here's an example of when there's fog at only 3 sites. And so the model classified these 3 sites as having fog. And as you can see, there's more fog than the other sites. Cannon Beach is completely clear. However, if you look at the images of Otter Rock and Agate Beach, there is some fog, but just not enough to kind of pass over that threshold of being classified as foggy. And so here's an example of when there's fog that's only at one site. So this is like the most likely occurrence in the database. And so Beverly is pretty foggy, though also sunny. And all of the other locations are pretty clear and sunny. And at Otter Rock, you just see like a tiny amount of fog at this one location. So to conclude, public cameras can be used to determine fog occurrence patterns. There is high geographic variability along the coast and even within a specific city like Newport. And then we also have noticed that in Newport, the number of days with fog has not changed over time, but the number of fog hours have declined over the past 30 years. And some possible next steps. So we're considering comparing the camera data set to satellite-derived fog and low cloud cover to see how they compare. And also pull in other camera data sets like from the Department of Transportation or from Alert West. And then also to look at meteorologic drivers of fog variability along the coast. So thank you for listening. And I'd like to open for questions now.
Thank you so very much for sharing with us. Yeah, we'll open it up to questions and we'll throw it to folks online first. It looks like we don't have anybody putting into the chat. So go ahead, if you have a question, put it in there. For folks in the room, I'm gonna run around with the mic.
I had a question. Did you consider the elevation on your cameras as far as whether that would affect it? Because I live just north of the airport there and kind of part of the way up the hill, and it seems like that difference in elevation alone could make a fair amount of difference, particularly combined with the topography of the landforms to the east of the coast. So.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely something we want to look into more. One of the reasons I've been here visiting the sites is to look at each of the camera locations to actually see how high up they are across the from the ground. You can get a sense from some of the photos. But yeah, that's definitely something we haven't considered yet, but we want to consider.
Thanks. Very interesting and good presentation. First, a clarification. The camera at Yaquina Head, I think that your map showed it out at the tip of Yaquina Head, but my understanding of the OSU camera that's there, that I think they call Agate Beach, it's actually up at the top of Salal Hill where the radio tower is located and things like that. And it showed that in some of the pictures that I saw, that it's actually looking down from above there. So do I have that right? And maybe it was mischaracterized as being out at the tip?
That is very possible because that site, along with Lincoln City, are the two I haven't visited yet.
Oh,
so
okay.
that was kind of my best guess of where the camera is.
And I'm fairly familiar with, I mean, I look at that one all the time, or I have in the past and have been up there and that. So that's, I just wanted to get that clarification. The other thing that I found really interesting was the slide that you showed about the fog occurring when we get those southerly winds. And it's not uncommon for that to be a southerly reversal in that, you know, that's what they typically call that. And I don't find that at all surprising that we get that sort of fog come in there. And I think that you very likely will see, you know, a pretty good correlation with that weather pattern when that occurs. So that's interesting finding too. And
oh, cool.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for your insights.
Alex, did you want to add something to that? I saw hand go.
I just wanted to confirm that it is the camera on Salal Hill that he's talking about. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's not quite at the tip, but
All the way
there's
there.
like 2 hills there. It's more. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, super cool project. I was wondering if you've dug into your model. I'd be curious to hear more about like what of those pixel-wise statistics or parameters you're seeing like associating with fog or clear.
Yes. So I had a slide for this at the end in case somebody asks. But actually there's a paper by Choi 2014 that identified fog aware image statistics. So there are 14, oh wait, I think we're using 7 of these. And so they're kind of different measures of contrast or of noise or of color. The orange squares are like grayscale statistics, like how much does a certain pixel compare to the average, the standard deviation of their neighboring pixels. The teal squares are measures of the color distribution within the image. And then we also have entropy, which is a measure of noise in the image. And so we're calculating these statistics over 3 horizontal patches, and that is our input data set into the model. And some of the most important ones are kind of the average variation of a given pixel to its neighboring pixels. And then the most important patch, as you might expect, is the middle one, which kind of looks right at the horizon.
Thank you. This is a good project. I kind of jumped to the next step, potential next step for someone else. And it has to do with fog drip and the fact that you could go to another location inland and track what you're doing here with the amount of fog that gets deposited in the uplands where we historically had trees and where we don't have trees, as an example. It would be a good story to be able to tell, and it is a lot of water. Every one of our communities are struggling with natural climate solutions and water storage. And so I'd say it's a next step potentially.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
All right, one more throw out to folks online. Any other questions in the room? Thank you so very much for sharing with us. I appreciate it. And I hope that your experience here in Newport will bring you back up to visit us.
Thank you.
One more round of applause, please.